we'll change tracks a little bit in my conversation and talk about some of the building blocks to unleash the ML applications of the future. And I'll touch upon some of them in this particular conversation. Preaching to the choir here, but just wanted to bring out something that I think this particular audience really agrees with, is that drug discovery is becoming AI driven, and we have two proxies sort of to outline that. One of them is the amount of deals done by large biopharma companies to acquire AI generated assets, and this number was taken from 2019. I think it already looks different, looks much larger. And on the other side is sort of the size of the AI in drug discovery market. I think the thing to look at is just how fast is it increasing annually, which is more than 40%, and by some estimates by early 2030s, we are looking at a market which is upwards of $15 billion. So very large market, lots of potential for the kind of things that everybody who's here is working on. One of the points that I want to make here is that often when we think of AI, and especially when we think of AI in drug discovery, or we're thinking of predictive modeling in a very narrow sort of connotation, where we're thinking of something like AlphaGo or AlphaFold, I should say, where there's a very specific problem where you're trying to, for example, in that case, predict protein structures. You have a very clear objective function that you're trying to optimize, and you train a model on large amounts of data to get there. And that's a very important use case, and we will keep referring to that. But there's also another function that AI plays today, and this is something, for example, that you see if you Google, how's the weather in Boston today, and I think Google will tell you that it's windy and it's raining, and those kind of insights are powered by Google and organizations like Google and their search engines like Google, by also using AI to combine knowledge from many different sources, right? So Google, for example, is pulling in data from news channels and weather stations and so on, and it's using AI to combine them into finding a relevant piece of information. So that's not quite similar to predictive modeling, and I think this audience would know a bunch of use cases, for example, where getting to the answer, for example, in target ID is not as simple as training a model and running it and saying that, okay, what are my 3 most important targets? It does not quite work like that. But AI can be very helpful in assimilating and growing knowledge as well, apart from predicting some very objective things. This is something that I think you've heard us before. You'll hear us again and again, and we really believe that given the state of the field where AI and machine learning is, and again, I'll end up using AI and machine learning interchangeably, at least in this conversation. Given the state where things are, for a lot of applications, it's more important as to what data you're using rather than how well are you able to refine the model. And I think Abhishek referred to something in his conversation where he talked about the fact that you can change your data and get to better conclusions. For a lot of applications, whether you're predicting cell type or you're trying to predict important genes, it's often more important to change your data rather than do too much to your code. And I have 2 statistics here. So Hugging Face is, for those of you who do machine learning more often, it's a repository of models. Just as GitHub is for code, Hugging Face is for models, and there are about 20,000 models. And for a lot of use cases, you can just start by using a model that's there on Hugging Face, and Hugging Face is just, again, a proxy for the argument that I want to make. You can find very good models being published in literature for your use cases as well, and they're often good enough, right? And very few organizations have this kind of appetite. When we look at 2 particular models which have been talked about a lot, AlphaFold, I think very well understood. The training data is more than 170,000 proteins. GPT-3, about 499 billion tokens. I don't even know what it means, but that's a lot of data to train something, right? But the point that I also want to make is that you don't need one, so much data, and two, you need data that is high quality, and that will often do the job without having to build the next GPT-3 with a few billion parameters. And therefore, we believe that access to clean and usable data will be the differentiator for a lot of discovery efforts tomorrow, right? And um, what this means is that if and we focus on two particular words here, right? Clean and usable, right? Often you can have access to a lot of data, and for example, the speaker before me, Professor Sirota, she referred to the fact that they're using data from public repositories, but it can often be very hard to use that kind of data, or in the first conversation where Professor Churchill was talking about it, they spend a lot of time doing QC and making sure that the data is standardized, it's ready to use, and you cannot start without that. So if you have data that is clean and usable, that's often half the battle won. And organizations and teams that will have access to that will often be faster at getting to insights than organizations who don't. Lastly, I think often when we think of data, we only think of data as experimental data, or things that are there in CSV files or Excel files, which are structured and are what we are calling here experimental data. But there's more to data than just that. There are publications, there are databases, and some of them we have seen. There are even work in progress analysis. So this could be a notebook that your colleague has used to run a particular analysis. This could be a presentation that your lab has been sharing back and forth as a way to kind of share insights. It could be the human assessments that, let's say, collaboratively as a group you're looking at and you're refining. And so all of this is data, right? So data is not just experimental data. It's not just data that is generated from a machine under a very controlled condition, but it's also what you do through the process of discovery. And very little time is spent actually on just doing the experiment. Often a lot more time is spent on collating and analyzing and thinking through what information is there, often in a group. And all of them together can power what we are calling a knowledge graph. And those knowledge graphs are what we believe the future of having clean and usable data are. So it's not just enough to have your experimental data curated and ready, but it's also to have all of these other bits and have them come together in the form of a knowledge graph. And a knowledge graph, again, different people use that term interchangeably with knowledge base. But for us, essentially, it's a growing body of interconnected information and interconnected. Therefore, the graph connotation. But it's a body of knowledge that grows as you work along with it. So what we're trying to make an argument is that I think over time people will go from just seeing data as flat files to seeing data as knowledge graphs. So here's the promise, but what are the challenges, right? And we talk about just a few of them. Again, there are more than these, but most importantly for us, they're data silos. So often, even within organizations, data is kept in different places. It's very hard to have one place to query it, see it. Across organizations, of course, it's a whole other game. If you want to search even for different public repositories, it's a lot of work. There isn't always a common vocabulary, and I think you've seen speakers before me refer to that. When we're talking about what kind of ID to use, how do you refer to a particular disease? Data is often uncurated, and by uncurated we mean that it does not have the right label, so you don't know what organism, what is the tissue. It's also the underlying data could be differently structured. So if you're putting it into any kind of machine learning module, that's hard. And finally, there are cultural and incentive issues, and often these are the hardest ones to solve. Data sharing is hard. It's not always incentivized. It's also not, in some cases, as obvious as to why you should do it in the first place. But we believe that some of these things will change, right? And these are our building blocks to kind of the knowledge graph of the future. The first one that we're going to talk about is curation, or we're going to use that term interchangeably with biomedical NLP. Second one is federated learning, or learning from non-collocated data. Third is how do you look at non-comparative data, data that is not necessarily your own, and finally advancements in data-centric AI. So I'll go to the first one, which is curation of biomedical NLP. And the question is, on the right of the slide, we have represented the movement in biomedical NLP, and over time, NLP in general has gotten to a point where you have these things that are called foundational models, which can serve a whole variety of use cases. These are the things which are made of those 500 billion tokens and have billions of parameters, and they work really, really well on a very different, very heterogeneous variety of problems. And over time, what is happening is that they're being made more specific by training them further on a specific corpora. For example, what we are doing with corpora of metadata. And so this leads to more specialized models, which in turn kind of feed into assisted learning. And by assisted learning, we mean learning where there are humans in the loop. You do weak annotation, and then you have humans kind of correct it, and the models keep learning due to that. And thanks to kind of the development in biomedical NLP, and again with humans in the loop, we believe that part is pretty important. You can now increasingly look at data which is messier, right? And again, depending upon how you want to see it, you can maybe you'll maybe disagree with me on what is more messier, but you can look at very different kind of documents, right? So we're talking about everything from a publication to a structured database, but you can use the same kind of biomedical NLP to sift through all of them, to read through all of them, and be able to pick up labels and tags which can connect all of your data. So that's one. Then we talk about the idea of being able to learn from data which is not necessarily in one particular place, in one particular location. And this is a big limitation for privacy and other reasons. And as this group, I think, is well aware, often it's not enough to be able to anonymize data. It's very hard to anonymize data, especially if you're looking at genetic data. There is research which says that even imaging data can be reconstructed to, for example, reconstruct your face. So it's not always possible to anonymize data perfectly and have it, all come into this one central server where you can run your queries, you can train your models. Versus, if data did not have to be centralized, where if it could, sort of stay where it was, and your model could travel to it and learn from it and then come back, right? This is sort of the paradigm of learning from non-collocated data, so learning from data in a non-centralized way, or what is called federated learning. And we believe that healthcare and drug discovery will benefit hugely from federated learning. This is something that again, internet companies have done before, because they want to train their models on your phone without being able to take out all of the data from there. And this is now coming more and more into drug discovery and healthcare. Thirdly, and this is our third road, this is our third building block, which is premium data. And premium data is data, the way we're defining it is data that is neither public, so it's not there in the public domain, and it's not proprietary to the organization in question, to the biotech company or the life science company in question. And we think there's a lot of data out there which is just not available, right? So we talked about challenges of data that is available, but there's a lot of data out there which is not available, and it's located at any of these places or a combination thereof. But the challenge is that even if this data was available, it would be largely uncurated and would be very hard to use, right? Imagine that as a team, you have access to data for AML for 30 different centers. You would spend a lot of time just getting all of your data consistent and ready to use. That's after, that's if you do have access. I think what we also believe that data aggregators such as ourselves would streamline the process of being able to get data from these multiple organizations, This is not going to be a purely technological challenge. It's also a challenge of process. It's also a challenge of creating the right incentives, and data aggregators like us will help solve some of them, so that a lot of discovery efforts would be able to use way more data than they can today, more easily. Finally, I think a theme that has been referred to before, if you were present in this little conversation, data-centric AI will help us get insights from smaller data sets. Data-centric AI is also more ideal for rare events. So, a lot of questions in biology are very different from your average spam filter or average your recommendation for what you should buy, because it's looking for an event that does not happen that often, and data-centric AI will also going to help there. So you won't need to work with these huge amounts of data all the time. You'll be able to unlock value from things that are much smaller as well. So how do all of these come together, and what does this mean for you? So we talked about four different roadblocks, 4 different building blocks, and the way they come together is that we believe that public, premium, and proprietary data, and premium data, again, as we defined it, is data that is neither yours or not in the public domain. All of these will have to be combined together into some kind of a harmonized structure, what we are calling what we called knowledge graph earlier, what we as Elucidata call Omics Atlas, which is our offering on Poly. And so all of these data sets will come together onto a homogenized, I should call it a knowledge graph, on top of which you would be able to ask questions, which will be enabled through federated learning, and therefore you would probably be able to access data which would otherwise be very, very hard due to privacy and security concerns. And on top of that, hopefully if you can do data-centric AI, then that just gets everything together and goes from sort of having data available to having some things which are very actionable and effective and a lot more quickly, right? So a lot of this process can, if you did not have the curation, if you did not have the premium data, you would not have the right data. If you did not have curation, it'd be hard to search and query. If you could not do federated learning, again, it's very, very hard to take data from many different places. And finally, without data-centric AI, you would still be reliant on machine learning paradigms which work well for internet companies, but not necessarily for life sciences R&D efforts. And so we believe that our Omics Atlas, Poly's Omics Atlas, will provide this foundation to data-driven discovery, where it's combining these things to give you something which is very context specific, just for yourself, for your particular discovery effort. So this is for your team. You choose which data to combine. You choose which human assessments to combine. You choose which edges to connect, right? So it's a knowledge graph. You will be able to evaluate which of the edges work for you. They are more reliable and so on, and which ones are not. So you will create this context specific proprietary knowledge graph for yourself, and use that to power your predictive ML as well as just knowledge assimilation efforts, both. And it will help in all of these ways, right? Like you can do predictive modeling faster, hopefully, because the data is structured. Definitely findability would be improved because you would have a consistent vocabulary, harmonized vocabulary, so you'll be able to easily search and query. It would help break data silos because hopefully due to federated learning and having the right protocols in place, organizations in different parts of maybe your own organization or other organizations are more willing to share data with you, and all of that would hopefully help you amplify context specific knowledge. So build a knowledge graph for yourself, use human oversight to decide what's important, to decide which of the nodes and edges of this particular graph are relevant for your particular use case. Do that on the fly, and we hope that this will help power many different parts of your drug discovery process. And thank you so much. That's about it. I think I'm just about a minute over time.